All right, so formal welcome to all the panelists and everybody else on the call to this third edition of Anomind Conversations in this COVID period. Let me just quickly introduce all the panelists. We have Sunil Bantia from AliAccess, Chief Operating Officer. We have Sunil Muralidharan, Managing Director of Hoganes, joining in from Pune, and Sunil Bantia is in Bangalore. Aditi Jain from Asian Paints PPG, joining in from Mumbai, and Shailesh Lokande from Schneider Electric, joining in from Bangalore as well. Srini from Timken has had some medical emergency, and unfortunately he would not be able to make it unless he makes a surprise entry, but we'll probably miss his views on this call. So this is a very different edition, I would say, from what others we have been talking so far, because there is a common base. But with all of you, while it's all engineering and manufacturing, you're all related to a different stream of end consumers, right? So that in that sense is different. So we'll have probably a little bit of different format and discussion over here. But just to break the ice before I get started, I do this for all the conversations, and if you had attended, you would know. But let me ask a question: quick answer, do you support the lockdown from as a manufacturing organization, or you think it really badly affected, worsened the economy? Something that Rahul Bajaj has been advocating, that it's been spreading the virus more than the prices. So a quick yes or no. I'll just start from my screen left to right. Aditi, do you support, or are you on the contra group?
No, so I fully support the lockdown. The economy has definitely taken a hit, but as it stands, even for Asian Paints as a concept, safety obviously comes first for the employees, for the community at large. So definitely, I'm totally yes for the lockdown.
All right, Sunil Bantia, I'll have to say the full name here.
Between yes and no. So the short answer is yes, do support the lockdown, but frankly, it is unsustainable. We are on our fifth week, and I don't think it's something that we can sustain over another week or so. So yes, it's a yes or no answer.
So it was yes till now, but no going forward, I would say. Okay, Sunil Muralidharan, what's your
so Rishi, you won't get a contrarian view from me. I mean, it is a yes as a citizen and as part of the industry, but like Sunil Bantia rightly mentioned, not sustainable in the long term. So we need to find a way to strike a balance.
Sure. Shailesh, any exciting answer from you?
You might feel I'm going with the majority, but that's not the case really. I mean, I totally echo the views. What the two gentlemen said is, so far yes, because the human life is of paramount importance. But I think with the restrictions and precautions that government can lay down, we need to get going at some point of time.
Right, absolutely. So I think I support the same, and thanks for the quick answers. Let me get started with the agenda. And what I'm going to do is, in my mind, I have formed 4 of you in 2 groups. Now, AliAccess and Schneider, in my mind, falls under infrastructure support industry, and where you really driven by that. And Hoganes and PPG is more related to consumer. Hoganes, I say, because what I remember, it's heavily dependent on auto as a sector, unless things have changed. By the way, Sunil, just a trivia that it's been 20 years since I joined Hoganes. It was in year 2000 that I began my corporate career there. So nice to I've been talking to you, heading that organization today exactly after 20 years. I joined there in January 2000. Right, so my some of my impression is still dated, so you may have to update me on that. So that's that's how That's how I look at four of you. And the way we would go is that I'll first ask you about the current situation, your existing portfolio, the demand that you have had so far. So how do you see as a scenario shaping up as we open this lockdown? We will then talk about any innovations happening, any new shifts that you may see in your organizations happening in terms of product or things like that. And we'll then talk about the supply side of the things, and there's a lot to talk about there in terms of localization, the costs, cash flows and stuff. And then we'll then talk about your impressions on the importance of planning, and then we'll take the questions from the audience, right? So let me go to the infrastructure group first, as I'm taking liberty to label you. Sunil Banthia, so how do you see things panning up in terms of the current portfolio of, say, plastics and the pipes industry that you represent in this current scenario with the lockdowns? And just setting a quick context as well, we see a slowdown in the real estate with work from home getting a predominance here on. Government spending may go down considering that the revenues are now taking a big hit. From that context, how do you see things shaping up for the industry?
Access is essentially in the space of building materials industry, and as a lot of you are aware, construction really took a big nosedive once the lockdown got announced. So one of the things that we've seen in our current portfolio is that demand has really nosedived in that sense in terms of our conventional products spent for the plumbing industry and the construction industry. Part of our portfolio is also in terms of agricultural, pipes, in that, whether it is boring pipes or whether it's either for irrigation. That part of the portfolio is something where we are still seeing a fair bit of demand, because it's a seasonal product in that nature, and agri is something which the government has thankfully deemed it as essential, and therefore we still seeing a bit of demand. So in summary, what I would say is that at this point of time, there's a fair degree of ambiguity in terms of how demand would shape up even post-COVID, whether what shape the recovery would be, and in terms of whether we would really be back to the old times, so as to say. So I think COVID, in some sense, is a bit of a watershed, and the new normal, to my mind, is going to look very different in terms of demands for us. So a reorganization of our portfolio to be a little more in terms of a post-COVID world is something that we will have to do. But on an as-is situation, parts of the portfolio where at this point of time we still have demand, and parts of the portfolio where we don't know when the demand will really come back, and what quantum of demand would we really be able to recover.
And are you supporting the current medical situation in any way through hospitals or something which is not the run-of-the-mill business, but a stopgap request coming in from government, just like we saw alcohol industry supporting the sanitizer? Is there anything that you guys are doing?
So we've done a fair bit of work in that space. So very early on in the lockdown, so we have what we call as a solvent cement plant, which in terms is essentially a plant that uses a lot of solvents, and therefore our facilities are, can be repurposed for the manufacture of sanitizers. So we have used the WHO approved formulation, the isopropyl alcohol based and the ethanol based formulations to produce sanitizers. We are doing it as part of the CSR. So both in and around Bangalore, there are two designated hospitals, Victoria and Boring, which are kind of COVID-19 hospitals. So we've been supplying to a lot of these hospitals, and to date we've supplied some 20,000 liters. The other part which we are good at is essentially injection molding, right? So we have fairly good expertise on injection molding. So what we did was to start with a 3D printing, design, leveraging some of the open source designs which are now available with the National Institute of Health US, to put together the face shields. That was the first one. So we teamed up with Narayan Vidyalaya, which in Bangalore, a lot of you may know, is one of the largest hospitals. So we are We worked with them in terms of designing the face shield, and the first supply is going to go out by next week. So we've kind of built up a capacity of 4,000 shields per day. The second, which is a very interesting one, which we've done, is essentially on face masks. So these are reusable N95 kind of face masks with, disposable filter media. Again, we've tied up with, Manipal and Narayan to kind of design the product at an appropriate price point. And the third thing, again, so all of these have one thing in common, which is that they use plastic and they use our expertise in understanding of injection molding, which we are good at. And the third piece that we are doing is essentially safety goggles. So between safety goggles, reusable face mask, and the face shield, these are some of the essential PPEs which are in, extremely short supply, to say at the least. And therefore, that is something that we are now offering the hospital. So in the space of last 2 weeks, we've kind of worked in defining a new product vertical for ourselves. At this point of time, it is all CSR, but what we thought it would be very essential in terms of how we could contribute, at least in a small way, to what is required at this point of time.
Absolutely. This is great to know, and I was really keen to know about this. So thanks for sharing. Shailesh, how does things look for Schneider or the electrical equipment automation industry as such from your thought process?
So I will stick to the industry scenario because
Sure.
I'm not supposed to talk really specific about Schneider, in my role.
That's okay.
So yeah, I mean, I would say it's really a hazy picture right now. We see some demand coming in from the essential category services for the last few weeks, but that's not going to last long. And I believe in terms of industry as well, there should be a subdued demand. That's what everyone is forecasting, and we think this is a once in a century scenario, and we hope it stays like that. Nobody wants it for another century at least, if not never. So the upcoming quarters looks very pressure, the demand under pressure, and I think it will take a lot of push from the government to really make the economy work again. And that's what I think everybody is hoping for.
Sure, and I think it's a pretty it's a 50-50 game for industrial automation and electrical automation, and I'll talk more about that as we go along. There may be certain interesting opportunities as well, but let's talk about the consumer space a bit. And Aditi, your demand, as I would understand, is more linked to the consumer durable industry as well, right? So how do you think how do you see things shaping up in for you as this portfolio, and is there something that APPPG is doing to just like Sunil mentioned in the current scenario outside the current portfolio, just to leverage the expertise?
In the current, so our supply is Asian Paints PPG primarily deals with a B2B segment per se, wherein our supplies are largely to industries for their maintenance work, for road construction, for floor warehouses, for consumer durables also, as you mentioned, example fans, example electronic equipment. So how we've seen the situation emerge as of today is that largely all the industries are not working, because as we are not getting permissions to operate, they are also not getting permissions to operate. So in the last almost 1.5 months, we have seen absolutely no sale happening. Whatever intermittent requirements are coming from the point of view of somewhere where the demand goes specifically for medical equipment or something which is linked to essential goods per se, only there we've seen some intermittent demand coming in. So that is how the today's scenario is. And traditionally for our business, what typically happens is that since the applications are in the area of MNR, or let's say for fan also as one example, this demand typically in the months from Feb to May, just before the monsoon, was seen to be very high. So this was supposedly the peak season for us. Now, since 2 months of this demand, we have not seen anything being turning over. So the problem is that the 2 months of the peak season have not been there. So now, when the operations really open up, let's say by May or by June, then we would have to see how that demand really balances up. Would it pick up? And then it would also be dependent on how soon the monsoon arrives. So the thing today is very fluid, as in even when we are speaking to the front end sales, even when we're speaking to the customers, the visibility even at their end is not really there, because something which might be categorized as a green zone today and could be permitted for operations could become a red zone tomorrow if new cases come up in that area. So anything which is coming up on the demand front is very, very fluid, and we have tried to drill down the demands as at the most granular level. We're looking at depot SQ level demands just to see that what is the industry that this application is linked to, what are the various views emerging that how would this industry perform in the subsequent days, and hence we're trying to strike a balance in the servicing front. Because if our projections on that front go wrong, we will end up with inventories which we will not be able to liquidate immediately. And with such a tight situation on the working capital today, we would definitely not want to block our money in material which is not required in the market.
Absolutely. And do you guys also support medical equipment in terms of coating? Is that a part of your product offering vertical, or has it been in this lockdown period any opportunity that's come to support that?
So the regular customers who are linked to that domain, we have seen some intermittent demands which have come in, and obviously there is a lot of potential there where we are definitely trying to approach the customers in that area and trying to convert their demands. But also it is limited to the extent to what we can service, because if we do not have the required material available with us and the factories are not working, and we do convert those orders, the challenge then comes on how do we service them without the inventories and the units being up.
Absolutely. And I think the mantra so far had been in the world that it's a demand-driven supply chain, and now it's been the other way around, right? It's a supply-driven demand, which we are seeing at the moment. Thanks, Aditi. Sunil from Hoganas.
Yeah. So, Rishi, like you rightly mentioned, our business is close to 80-85% dependent on automotive production, and that obviously completely stopped. So there was no demand in the last 4 to 6 weeks. When it comes back, obviously no one has a crystal ball, but the automotive industry has already seen a bad year last year. It wasn't, I mean, due to multiple factors. We had seen some shoots of improvement in the first quarter, especially for the components business, which is where we supply to. But then this came in, the COVID-19 situation came in. Now, when it comes back, cars and bikes will not be on the top of your purchase list, given the uncertainties. So we don't see demand jumping back immediately. It will be a slower curve. We are expecting demand to be back somewhere near the normal by end of the year. That's what the various news reports are talking about. OEMs have started production. Now that's the negative side. I mean, things haven't been very good for the auto industry, and we don't see that happening too fast, recovering too fast. But then there is the positive side also, which is that the current situation might lead to an increased preference for personalized transport. Especially two-wheelers, where people are graduating up from public transport to two-wheelers. There is some logic to it. So we could see that affecting the industry positively, the need for personalized transport. The second part, since we cater to the component industry, the global supply chain rejig, which is both in terms of Indian OEMs wanting to localize more, to be better, to be wanting to be in more control of their supply chain, and also global OEMs looking at sources beyond the largest current country of source.
Yeah.
So both these things will lead to uh, there is probably more component manufacturing out of India. Now that is another opportunity for a company like Hoganus. So there is both the negative and the positive side. It's important for us to remain, like you rightly said, it's not about the statistical analysis which will lead to a better demand forecast. It is more the scenario analysis and being in touch with the market and being connected with the market that will lead to better demand forecasting. We have to remain in touch and scale up accordingly. So that's where we are currently.
Absolutely, and nice to see you mentioning some positive hope there, and we'll talk more about that when we talk about supply. But let me take the demand discussion forward. I want to know what's the possible new innovation that may happen because of this COVID, and we are seeing this in all the discussions that this is leading either by accident or by forced demand or by sheer application of thought that what else can we do now. So Sunil, AliAxis, what do you see from the plastics perspective? And it need not be just the pipes. And I wanted to know from you, one is that the thing that you're supporting today to the medical industry, as you mentioned, do you think this may convert it into your portfolio at some point as a, you may want to monetize this, considering that you see a sustained demand for this? One, secondly, in terms of plastic usage per se, and I was reading that plastic may be back in many forms, considering that disposables are now more at risk. So and there is a contra view there as well, yes and no, but I just want to know your views. How do you see plastics being used or benefiting from this COVID, in which way, and in terms of the shift in the product offering of companies like AliAxis in the mid to longer term? Obviously not immediately. Yeah. Maybe we'll come back to Sunil. There seems to be either a bandwidth issue or a comp issue from his end. But let me till then pick Shailesh's thought in terms of in the electrical automation. Let's see, would we see some kind of innovation here in terms of in the scenario that we are now in terms of social distancing, more need for automation? Will companies in this vertical come up with some new innovative products in terms of residential usage or even the industrial usage from electrical equipment perspective? What are your thoughts on that? And also the hospitals, I should not miss out on that. Yeah, the healthcare sector.
Yeah, I think what one thing that's been a blessing in this whole scenario is everybody has becoming increasingly digital, and when we are becoming digital, we as this whole electrical industry also supports the IT industry for their backup. So
yes,
that's been a space where I believe there will be a lot of innovative products. I would say there are already some research and developments that are on the way, but this will be one space where we will see huge innovative products coming in terms of more bandwidth, more capacity with optimized space, and I would say increased efficiency. Today, nobody expected IT infrastructure to be such move, and we already, at points are seeing the perils of IT infrastructure working. What we'll be looking for is really a robust infrastructure, and that's one, I would say, green shoot that I think the industry is looking at. The other one is really its adaptation of the digital tool. Uh, uh, we I think the offline sales in this industry, or I would say the online sales in this industry, have been hardly. And in the current scenario, I think people are already looking at exploring the online platforms to reach out to a larger customer base, and, sell their products. So that one platform or the channel, I think will be another way that industries will look at exploring and how to increase their sales and efficiency.
Okay, that's interesting, and I was not sure of, and this is a very interesting thing that you brought up about online, and maybe all of you can touch upon that, and how do you see that, because this is not something one thinks of immediately when we talk about manufacturing and industrial base, right? It's we relate it more to the consumer space. So very interesting observations from Shailesh. Sunil, are you back? Can we hear you now? Let's try. Yes, we can. Yeah, I hope you could hear my comments completely. So if you could, then maybe you can give us your thoughts.
So my apologies, the audio wasn't working. So could you just repeat that, please?
Okay. So I was wanting to know from you the innovation in the plastic space, and especially what you mentioned about how you're supporting the current COVID fight. Would you at some point be looking at monetizing those products and adding that to your portfolio? And so would probably many other companies, considering the expertise and the what you would have gained, the sense of market and the sustained demand for that. Also, plastic as a commodity per se. If we can get your views, how do you see this playing out with from in a post-COVID scenario? Would you think that the usage would rise, considering that the disposables would go down? Sorry, the reusables would go down, and the era back to disposables in this fear scenario. So how do you see the as per se future of the industry as such, and then the portfolio of companies like AliAccess changing because of this scenario, and any other innovations that you may be working on?
I think there is going to be a fair bit of innovation which would be required, not just in the products that we make, but also perhaps in some of our processes that we have.
Okay.
A lot would change in terms of how a plumber has access to homes, going forth. So I know there are close relatives of mine who are now extremely, they will think twice before a plumber enters, or before anyone enters their house for that matter. And then what is the kind of PPE that they would want that plumber to have, etc. So there are questions in terms of how do we, innovate in some of our processes for the larger community of our customers in terms of getting them access to their end customers. Apart from that, I think from a general industry point of view, I don't think plastics per se, in terms of its usage, that is perhaps not going to come down as a result of this, or dramatically go up as a result of this. But what will happen is, and I think someone referred to it as you service customers, and contact like selling. Can you make it easier for your distributors to order on you, etc. So what we are looking at is, in some sense, yes, to a certain extent, monetizing products that we are making at this point of time geared for the healthcare professionals. But frankly, that's not something that is going to be large for us in the short term. And really, at this point of time, we are really looking at how do you, for the core part of our portfolio, how do you service that, and how do you service it in this ambiguous environment? Change fairly fast. So that's I think is the key challenge for us and for our industry at this point of time. For us, for the way we do business at this point of time, that is unlikely to become or addresses a certain customer who may or
Am I the only person facing the issue with Sunil's
there
video?
will be other innovation within our current process of where we.
No, Rishi, we seem to have a problem.
Okay.
Sorry, my audio is playing up.
Yeah, your audio and video both are breaking, Sunil.
Yeah.
So it's oops. Sunil seems to be facing a bit of an issue there.
I think that's why we need a better IT infrastructure.
Shailesh already sensing some good news here in terms of business opportunity. All right, so let me, while Sunil comes back, let me go to PPG, and I wanted to check with you, Aditi. Will we see some kind of innovation in the coatings as well, especially in the consumer space, to make products more compliant with the hygiene standards and stuff like that in the post-COVID world? Would we see any innovation in that front, and any other industry that you're supporting? I can't think much in terms of infrastructure stuff, but maybe you can throw some light on that. Now, what are the innovations that can we expect?
Yeah, Rishi, so as you rightly mentioned, in the industrial segment, where the main focus is corrosion resistance, and the customers are very price sensitive, much innovation and much demand on that front coming in from the customers seems likely. But if you look at the consumer demand on the consumer goods space per se, then in that space, if you would recall, anti-dust coatings for fan was a big rage, is still a big rage at this point of time. So some demands in that area of, let's say, an antimicrobial coating or antiviral coating, with people getting more conscious on the health and safety part of it, we might see some demands upsurging on that area.
Okay, so when if we start seeing ads in June with the fans antiviral coating and all, we know who is behind the scenes. So we'll probably remember your picture. So yeah, I mean, I think I would expect those things coming up now. At least I don't know how in reality they would play, but definitely from the marketing perspective and the demand going that way, we'll probably see those innovations.
Yeah, so I see that more as a consumer, that I might go in and buy something like that from the market. I might demand something like that from the shopkeeper, that I need a fan. Do you have something in that space?
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's a new mantra. Sunil, from the auto space, what kind of innovation you think you can expect? And I know Hoganes is now big time into 3D printing, and one of the leaders, as I was reading, which wasn't there when 20 years back. So, and I think that's a big opportunity. And what I was reading a few days back, that it's next big thing post COVID, 3D printing. So looks like a big opportunity there. What's the innovation that you guys would be working on as industry as per se in that front?
So Rishi, like you rightly mentioned, yes, there is a significant amount of investment that we have been making and will continue to make on the what we call additive manufacturing space, which is what would commonly be called 3D printing with metal powders. And that finds application in the healthcare industry, especially with implants, not as much with the medical devices, but more with the implants. So that's an area which is related to healthcare. We will continue to invest in solutions for the automotive industry as we take the journey towards e-mobility. So our current portfolio caters to the internal combustion engines, which is the IC engines. And as we see more electrification happening, there will be more of our solutions going into the traction motors and transmissions, which are specific to electric cars and electric two-wheelers and three-wheelers. So that obviously will continue. Nothing related to the COVID situation, of course. The other area, which is which is in terms of our diversification and where we are investing our resources and money in innovation, is water treatment, which is related to health and the general well-being. So both groundwater treatment and wastewater treatment, industrial wastewater treatment, is an area that we've been investing in for some years. In fact, India, outside of United States, is one of the R&D centers for our environmental business, what we call, which is into water treatment. So that's an area where we will continue to invest. Automotive continues to remain our largest business right now, but we are building these other pillars so that we have a more diverse portfolio. Not completely related to COVID situation I don't see the COVID situation accelerating or decelerating any of these initiatives, but these are the various innovations and diversifications that we are investing in. The other thing,
go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So the other thing, Rishi, which everyone talked about, is in terms of how the processes will change. One is the product innovation. I think processes digitization will be a critical need for all of us going forward. In terms of supply chain, of course, we need to be more agile. We need to be able to respond faster to changes. For that, information becomes critical. Connected supply chains, right from our suppliers to us, to our customers, that needs a digital platform. So that becomes a critical, and I think that will get accelerated. Online sales, it was interesting to hear discussions around that. Coincidentally, I have been part of a startup which was in the B2B e-commerce space for 2 years. So any change in terms of where you buy from or where you sell, which is an alternative selling channel, has to be driven by productivity improvement, better reliability, keeping quality the same. I mean, saying that whether you buy online or offline, the quality of the products that you get will be the same. It will not depend on cost or productivity and reliability. For that, online platforms need to align to the current purchase process. And that's when the adoption will increase, both from the buyer side and the seller side. There are platforms that are available which have made it possible to consolidate suppliers and bring down the number of transactions and bring in a little more reliability through their procurement operations. But I think it's a journey which will take time in the B2B space so that online becomes more popular, both as a selling platform and a buying platform. So that's my take on that. I think we have lost Rishi and Sunil.
Yeah, guys, I'm back. I don't know. I'm now on the phone, so
okay.
You may not see me, but you can hear me, I guess. Yeah.
Okay.
So Sunil, this is Sheetal. So possibly, I think since we lost the connection with you last time, so can you also shed some light which we couldn't hear at that time on the innovations front that you were talking about?
Sure. So I don't know where you guys lost me, so I'll kind of summarize in terms of what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
So to the point in terms of what are the innovations that we are looking at in terms of how the world will behave post-COVID, what we do believe is that, and I think Sunil Muralidharan alluded to it, is that a lot of our processes need to change, and our processes need to change in a manner that would be amenable in terms of ways of working in the post-COVID world. To give you an example in terms of how our plumbers, for example, will access customer houses, it's not going to be the same as before. There is going to be a lot of precautions which need to be taken. So we are looking at in terms of how do we drive things like a contactless selling, how do we drive, as much of digitization that we can do within the supply chain. There is perhaps not so much that we can do on the e-commerce platform given the nature of our product and how we sell at this point of time. But there is definitely a lot which can be done in terms of how we move processes that can really help us in terms of driving our core portfolio sales. I think the other question which Rishi had is in terms of how do we see the outlook of the plastic industry going forward, whether demand is going to go up or whether we see long-term demand coming down as a result of this. Frankly, while it is a little early to make that kind of a judgment call, we don't think that there is going to be much of a difference. The difference really lies in terms of how we would be able to service customers. And that's going to change dynamically because, in some places, depending on how, containment is, whether it's an orange zone or a red zone or a green zone, businesses will be open, and therefore being able to service, what is open is really going to be key. So therefore, innovation in terms of how we execute on a daily basis and how we sense demand, not based on historical data, but based on what's available to be serviced, so as to say on a day and on a week, that is something that is going to really be different as we go along.
Thanks, Sunil. Thanks for these inputs. Just give me a second. I think Rishi is trying to join back in. Looks like Rishi is still facing some issues. So in the meantime, let's talk about the supply side constraints, what you guys are facing. So it would be, we know that supply chain is big time hit at the moment. So what do you face, say, especially in the chemical and the industrial goods segment? What are the challenges that you are seeing in the supply chain? What are the various constraints, maybe in terms of, raw materials? And also, are you guys now looking towards, say, localization? Because a lot of imports might be happening, say, from China, which is now under big threat. So do you foresee any change in that front as well, that the sourcing which is happening, say, currently from outside India, are you now looking towards moving towards, say, a localized approach at the moment now? Aditi, maybe you can share your views over here first.
Yeah, the situation is pretty volatile. So COVID-19 correctly epitomizes the term VUCA. So there is volatility, there is uncertainty in demands and supplies, complexity, and again the ambiguity is throughout the supply chain. So we see the only way to handle the situation in the current terms is have a proper risk assessment of where all other risk areas throughout the supply chain, and have risk management strategies in place. And then obviously when it comes to execution, we would have to show that agility as a supply chain team. So when we see the disruptions that are happening at various stages, then there is obviously when it comes to servicing, there are disruptions in productions, wherein some units are opening up, some units are not opening up. And if you have unique linkages wherein the plants which are in the red zones uniquely produce some SKUs for you, then taking those calls on where those productions need to be shipped, the servicing in place, and not lose sales, which is going to be anyways very tricky to get orders. And losing sales at that point of time would there could be a thing which could even affect the business more badly. So anyways, getting the production footprint in place would be the first thing which would be important once this disruption opens up. The second thing is getting the correct visibility of the demand. So as I mentioned earlier, that the demands are very volatile at this point of time. So postponing production to the best extent possible, wherein you're getting very early the actual visibility from the end customer on the actual need. That would be the key, and then really interfacing with the sales team to that extent to get the real demand picture in place would be essential. Then coming to the raw material bit. So as a matter of fact, one of my friends had a very interesting data saying that the crude that has changed over the last 30 years. So if we see to what extent the crude has changed by more than 5%, the number of instances where crude has changed by more than 5%. So the peak was back in 2009, wherein in the entire year, the crude had fluctuated around 28 times. And in 2020, we've already seen that fluctuation to the extent of 26 times in 4 months. So the kind of volatility that is there in the system today is immense. So so kind of cushioning ourselves against these uncertainties and these fluctuations would be key. As Sheetal mentioned, a lot of our raw materials are also imported. So, and a couple of these sources lie in China as well. So, how the government policies shape up in terms of the imports would become very essential. And so, definitely some of the localization activities had started as early as January, when the first instances of COVID-19 had come up. So we had, when we were anticipating disruptions to happen in raw material supplies, some initial proactive steps on developing alternate vendors had happened at that point of time, and we get a 2-month leeway wherein we could do some pre-work in that area before we got into that situation wherein we were also locked down. So obviously, developing local sources for single sourced raw materials and for sources where, so let's say now even Europe for that matter, if the sources are in Europe, even US for that matter, when would that emerge and when would that really come up as a strong source is something which is not known. How much of that, of their production would they store for catering to the local demands, and how much would they really export when the business opens up would be another question. So obviously localization of RMs would become key. Another thing that I would touch upon is the warehouse spaces being also a part of the logistics and the distribution teams. One of the key challenges that we're facing today is that even if we're getting approvals for starting production, we are not able to start the productions because we're already stocked on in the inventory. So as in, we see a very strong hockey stick pattern in our sales. So when the sales actually stopped in the month of March, we were 10 days due for our sales, and a lot of sales was due to happen in the last 10 days. So we have seen a lot of inventory being piled up in our depots, and taking further production with the demand not coming in is becoming really challenging. So how do we really come up that situation is also a challenge. And in the time being, handling transportation with the focus of all the transporters being today on moving essential goods and not finding sufficient drivers in the market. Logistics has really become a challenge, and for us as well, wherein a lot of our dispatches are in the space of part truckloads. So with the warehouses of even the transporters not operating, the FTLs is the full truckloads is what we are seeing moving intermittently. So how do we really support whatever orders are coming in? What is also emerging to be a big challenge at this point of time.
Thanks, Adi. You guys can hear me now, right? I'm sorry about disappearing. I think Shailesh is seeing a lot of potential here. But I think you touched upon very interesting thing. I think this is a good time from the planning perspective to impress upon the this hockey stick that we see across industry in India. I know, and this uncertainty has probably hit it badly, as you mentioned. But I also wanted to check one of the things from the input cost perspective. I believe you would have some decent dependency on the petrochem space as well, and with this crude prices going down, do you see some benefit arising out of that as a silver lining in the whole thing? Is there any
So actually, the fluctuations in the crude is so high, and it is changing on such a daily basis that most of the suppliers have actually put freezes on the raw material prices. So the impact that's been seen in the crude prices impacting the raw material prices, and that is what the customers are also expecting out of us at this point of time. But that has not been seen really, because when we talk about prices, then obviously their replies are that when we are able to open up operations, then we would have to sense what the prices are, and we would be able to take a call on the prices only at that point of time. So we actually do not see the crude
But there is a
prices.
possibility, you reckon there is a possibility of that benefit flowing through?
Yeah, so that would completely depend on the demand supply scenario of that particular atom at that point of time. And
Yeah, if it sustains.
correct.
All right. Thanks, Aditi. I'm sorry, I may have lost the flow. So, Shailesh and Sunil, have you already given your views that I may have missed, or you still to go?
Not on
No,
this
so
topic.
Rishi, I did. So sorry, there are two Sunil, so I don't know who you're referring to, Rishi.
Okay. So, yeah, Sunil Muralidharan, maybe you could go next.
So on the actually Sheetal posted a new question around the supply side. So is that what you want me to? Okay.
Yes,
So
yeah.
On the supply side, the challenge is it'll differ from company to company based on where the supplier base is. So for us, it is largely India. So in terms of starting supplies, our suppliers starting operations, I think it will be more or less in sync with us starting operations, unless they are in a hotspot, say a Mumbai or a Delhi. So we don't have any suppliers in those hotspots. So we are assuming that the operations for them also will start in sync with our operations starting. We do have imported raw materials, but they primarily come from Sweden, where the Swedish model, there they haven't locked down their economy. They have used a very different approach to combating COVID. So there also we are kind of secure. Obviously, if you have raw material supplies coming out of China or Italy, Germany, France, or even the US, you would have concerns around supply continuity and reliability. For us, fortunately, that doesn't exist. For us, on the supply side, the concern is more around logistics. Like Aditi rightly mentioned, both transportation and warehousing are very people intensive, and transportation with the current restrictions between districts, at least in the short term, we seem to be facing challenges in terms of getting transporters to move our raw materials from our source to us. So that remains a challenge, and how the entire logistics industry will cope up with the new norm, the new normal, where physical distancing is important, because that industry is very manpower intensive. So that remains to be seen, how logistics work out. So that's where we see the challenge rather than the source of supply starting operations. So more the logistics.
And
so
how about the exports? You were quite bullish about that, but
yeah,
how soon you think that can happen, considering that the economies would still be closed in large part of the world?
Yes, you're right. The automotive industry in US has shut down, so that will take some time opening up, but I think they will start opening up. Nobody can sustain a lockdown for a extended period of time. So most of the exports that we had was going out to North America or back to Sweden. We did have exports going out to Asia Pacific within our group companies and customers directly also. Those customers continue to operate, though on a scale down basis, but they continue to operate. So as long as there is demand, I think our export logistics is working pretty fine. The customs clearances, I mean, both import and export, though they are operating with limited manpower, I think they are doing a great job in terms of making things possible. So we don't see a challenge there, unless, of course, suddenly there is a spike in demand and we need to scale up entire operations. and they become constrained in terms of managing the transactions. But I don't see that happening. There will be a gradual increase. So as of now, we don't see a challenge. In fact, when we have started operations now, it's primarily for exports because there is no domestic demand that is started. So we have been able to export out, and that hasn't been a challenge.
Okay, and I also wanted to check one point from you in the last segment that we were talking about demand before I got logged out, is the opportunity of this 3D in the auto, and you mentioned about medical and other opportunities, but don't you see a big cost reduction opportunity in the auto sector using the 3D technology in terms of the prototypes and the initial? So would you think that they would be more aggressively adopting to this, especially in this part of the world? I know there is a lot of adoption in the Western world, but in this part of the world, and considering the pressures that the industry is going through at the moment in auto, would you see a leg up in the demand for 3D wave, which would get passed on to companies like Hoganus?
Typically, I would imagine, though India tends to skip generations, but it kind of follows what happens in the developed economies. So going by that, auto hasn't been the largest adopter of additive manufacturing or 3D printing technology. It has been, so we've seen it happening in aviation, which, I mean, if there is, there is more MRO opportunity than actual manufacturing opportunity here in India. But if that happens, aviation, there is oil and gas, where additive manufacturing has picked up oil and gas equipment. There is obviously electronics, there is healthcare. Auto, not as much globally. So I don't see
would
that
this situation
changing.
push them to? That was my question. Would this situation push them to accelerate the adoption? Is there a possibility there?
I don't see that happening because nothing in this situation makes it necessary for them to look at smaller volume, flexible quantity manufacturing. Auto will remain large volume, same design across platforms, assembly of large volumes. So I don't see that changing immediately. With electrification, I can't say for sure. Maybe there will be opportunities for additive manufacturing. You mentioned prototyping. Yes, it has been adopted in the design prototyping stage, definitely. The volumes are small there, not as large as when you go into commercial manufacturing. So prototyping, even the auto industry has taken up additive manufacturing, not with metals, unfortunately, more with plastics, because prototyping is typically done with the plastics and not as much with the actual metal that will be finally used. So prototyping, yes, it's being used. It will continue to be used, but that's smaller volume.
Okay, right. Shailesh, with all this talk about localization, do you see, do you sense an opportunity for the industrial automation and as things move, if India capitalizes on this opportunity, which all of us really want to, but with this sense of getting the things more locally, setting up operations here, how do you see this panning up for the industrial automation and electrical automation industry? Do you see a big opportunity waiting there, though more localized?
Absolutely, because I think de-risking the supply chain will involve not only localization. I think it's just one piece of it. The other piece is, I think, going forward, the labor-intensive industries will be, pressure tested against natural epidemics. Asset-heavy industries will be pressure tested against natural calamities. And the global supply chain, I think, will be pressure tested against political situations around the world. So wherever it is, asset-heavy and labor-heavy industries, I think the industry will move or look at more automation, and that's I think will pick up once we move to the new normal. And I think the repetitive tasks that, or I would say the low skill jobs that are done today with manual, with all these measures of social distancing, very difficult to maintain in the manufacturing scenario. Those will be looked at how to digitize with automation, replace with automation. So I think yes, in that space we definitely expect innovation to happen, and as well the businesses to grow.
Absolutely. So thanks a lot for that overview. Now we are almost there on time, but I have one last question, and then we'll take a couple of questions from the participants as well. The last question is on the importance of planning. How do you see that panning out? How do you see that being part of the digital initiatives in the companies? How critical would planning become in the post-COVID scenario? Let's start with the planning head in PPG. Aditi, let's start with you, and then we'll go left, right.
Yeah, planning function from all points of time as in becomes the most critical at this point of time. But obviously, dependence on the tools and the automations would have to be very critically handled, wherein the dependence on, let's say, a demand planning tool, or let's say even a production planning tool for that point of view, would have to be, we would have to move away from that for a little point of time. Take that data only as a North Star per se, that only shows us direction where to go, but we would have to take our own decisions on how do we adjust those demands, how do we adjust those plans, how do we change plan linkages from one plant to the other. So there's going to be a lot of manual interventions. The entire logic where the managers have been fed into this planning system. Otherwise, it could be a very well automated planning system. That is how the things would emerge over the period of time. At least for the next 2-3 months, this is what we foresee, that there would have to be a lot of manual interventions into the planning system. And obviously,
also the collaboration may need more support, right? You may need more support from the tools in terms of collaboration because of these that supports this manual intervention, right?
Correct. So the shift in the focus would be purely from analytics to a more collaborative planning, wherein the interfaces are coming together and discussing the demand patterns and the how do we plug the supply gaps. So that would become the key when it comes to the planning front. And being nimble and being agile at this point of time would be definitely the key when it comes to planning again.
Right, and that example of nimble reminds me of our last webinar where somebody gave analogy of badminton, and that's how planning needs to be. You have to be very nimble on your feet. See where the shuttle is dropping. Thanks, Aditi, for your views. Sunil Bhantia, I believe you are on the audio. Your views on planning.
So I think a couple of things. One, I think the planning cycle will become extremely short. So, at this point of time, for example, we are really looking at a daily planning kind of a scenario. So therefore, a lot of our tools usually use historical data, and then planning horizons are usually either in terms of months or 3 months or quarters. So I think in the near term, we will see, planning cycles getting crashed. And as Aditi said, a lot of dependence perhaps in terms of feeding the right data into the tools, depending on how things are changing on the ground. So that's I think is something which is going to be critical. The other point would also be is that, in terms of SKUs which you designate as make to order and make to stock, given that at this point of time, cash preservation is going to be a challenge. There is also going to be a challenge in terms of how we service customers. I think there will be a shift in terms of a lot of our SKUs in our portfolio moving from make to stock to make to order. And that will, of course, mean the dynamics of having, a much higher, lower capacity utilization in the near term to take care of any spikes which may happen. So that's the other thing that is likely to happen in terms of how we actually, produce in terms of what stocks and on what basis. The other is also in the near term, I think inventories will go up because, one of the thought process we had is that in terms of supply network in the pre-GST era, used to have, kind of a warehouse at each state, so as to say, and then we went through a consolidation phase. Now to de-risk in terms of if you have only a couple of large warehouses and if this were to fall in the containment zone, obviously you risk the entire, the entire sales and entire supply situation. So maybe having smaller warehouses with, multiple warehouses with small inventories at each point may become a better option in terms of how we service customer orders. And while that may increase in terms of the inventory that you may carry, that may be the more effective way in terms of how order servicing will become. So those are some of the thoughts that we have at this point of time, based on what we are seeing in terms of how the demand and supply is planning out.
I think a very interesting point, Sunil. Thanks for bringing that up. And it's from the planning perspective, we know that the MTOs are always a bigger nightmare than we all like MTS much more. And very interesting thought process from Sunil, and also on the piling up of the inventory. But Sunil, how do you see these 2 points matching up? And if you think that we are going to have more of an MTO scenario, how do you think you'll be able to even pile up the inventory because of how would we know the customizations to be able to do that?
So, while the essential idea in going from migrating from make to stock to make to order would be is that since demand is uncertain and volatile, and we don't have the historical data in terms of being able to predict that, how do you ensure that you don't have large inventory coming up by producing make to stock, by doing the business as we are currently doing? So that's one which is actually kind of trying to negate the inventory increase. The other trade-off in that, or rather the other parallel train on this is that across our warehouses, we don't know at this point of time which will dynamically open and which will remain shut, and for what period of time. And therefore, if the networks as they exist today in terms of customer A being conventionally serviced from depot A or depot B, that may or may not be the network that you can live with. And given that overall demand is going to be low and it is essential in terms of revenue generation to be able to service customers with whatever demand you have, the thought process is that you may have to keep the same set of SKUs across different warehouses and service customers based on what logistic is available and what depots are frankly open and which state. So that's something which is going to take your inventory up. My point of view is that at this point of time, companies which are able to service are the ones which are going to win out of this entire opportunity, or whatever you call it, and that is going to be immensely important. And therefore, in the short term, I would see inventories go up.
Absolutely, and I think you need to safeguard your demand and market share, as we also probably will expect pretty poor customer loyalties as we go forward. So people are going to just fetch from wherever they can get rather than sticking to precedents before. So I think from that perspective, what Sunil mentioned holds a lot of value, but it would require deep pockets to be able to do that. Sunil Muralidharan, what's your take on the role of planning?
So Rishi, especially in the current situation where you need to be able to predict the demand as much as accurately as possible, react to that as fast as possible, that is obviously planning becomes critical. Like Sunil and Aditi mentioned, what changes is less dependence on statistical analysis of historical data. The shift towards getting more information from the ground on the growth drivers, which could be which are the customer manufacturing units that are starting if you have a dependent demand, when are they starting? What is their demand with their customers? Tracking all the growth drivers and feeding that into building your forecast. So building a scenario and then driving the forecast based on that scenario, rather than using input from the market to do overrides. So that will be the new normal, at least in the short to medium term, till things stabilize. And given the world today, I don't think stability will be an often used word anymore. So you would continue to have this dynamism. So that will change. We will have to be much more connected with our customers in terms of information flow. We will have to move towards what is that utopian world for a demand planner, which is a replenishment model. Completely pull-based supply chain. We will have to move towards that faster, and that needs technology. That needs the digital interface to be set in, and that will become a critical, driver for a demand planning team or a planning team. So these are the two. Otherwise, whatever Sunil and Aditya mentioned, I mean, they've covered all the other aspects.
Sure. So I think what you're saying is that we hear from all the industries is the scenario planning becomes very important in this ever-changing world, and also sensing, being closer to the customers and know what they are saying. Shailesh, your views from your industry perspective, how critical would that be?
I can't agree more than to that the customer intimacy is never important than before today. So I think the closer you are to the customer, assessing requirements, demands, I think you will be better in your planning. And what Aditi mentioned is another point is very well said, is it will require a very cross-functional planning and execution to really, I would say, outflank your competition. So, of course, planning plays an important role, but I believe beyond planning, a cross-functional team of front offices, planning, and also the execution will be key to the whole value stream.
Sure. Totally agree. And thanks a lot for all your views in how the this COVID and post-COVID scenarios are building up. A very interesting learning in many ways for me. So thanks a lot, and sorry for the technological disruption. And I hope things become better from here. We'll take few questions. If you guys can wait for a few more minutes, and let my colleague Sheetal take questions from the audience if they have already put in. And Sheetal, you can read out.
Yeah, thanks, Rishi. So we have a couple of questions here. The first question being, every challenging situation presents certain opportunities. So what, in your opinion, is the opportunity the current situation offers, and how should the industry grab this? It's open to say for
all. Who would want to take that? Sunil Bantia, would you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. I think there is a lot of opportunity for organized players in terms of being able to, ride out this current situation far better than perhaps smaller companies would be able to do. And therefore, it's an opportunity also in terms of how we treat our customers, how we treat our vendors, how do we treat our suppliers in terms of supporting them to ensure that those relationships are something that can be leveraged in terms of building the business for the future. I think that's something which is critical at this point of time when a lot of people are in difficult situations. The other opportunity, of course, is in terms of, and a lot of people refer to it, how agile and nimble you are in terms of being able to service customers and therefore build up partnerships for the future in terms of as the recovery progresses and whatever quantum of time that may take. I think this is really at this point of time ideal in terms of being able to, whether through digital means, through technology, as well as through being able to actually resources better service customers better, and that will really help businesses in the long term of being able to take advantage of the current situation.
Sure. Shailesh, your views on the electrical equipment industry? Any challenge, any opportunities you see there that you think is open for grab?
I would say, what are the opportunities? From supply chain viewpoint is, this is possibly the best scenario to stress test your whole supply chain, your own financials, your own supplier financials. And if you survive, and if your supplier survive, probably you have got a very efficient supply chain, at least in terms of financials. So I think that's one really opportunity, to understand how financially strong yourself and your supply chain is. And then the other one is really, I would say, digitization, and automation. How we can, in the new normal situation, how we can do away with, I would say, less manual tasks and adopt more automation to be able to comply to the new scenarios or the regulations that the government will impose. So I think these are two big, opportunities for me.
Any market opportunities you see up for grabs?
Yeah, I mean, one is electric mobility. As Sunil Muralidharan mentioned, if that is a space that will grow, and I believe our grids are not today manufactured or designed to sustain that load. And if we have to have more electric vehicles and more charging stations on the ground, it will call for a better electrical infrastructure, which in turn will offer a great opportunity for the players in this industry.
Okay, I think that brings a pretty interesting point. Sunil, anything to add from your perspective? I'm a little skeptical, and I would be taking this up in our auto segment as well, but since you are so closely related, how do you see this whole future of electric mobility, considering the falling oil prices and the demand itself of mobility going down, considering the whole work from home and not venturing out much? How do you see this panning out? So there is a big opportunity, not only for you, but for the industry. But then there is also now a risk of demand at least slowing down, if postponing. How do you see that?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, in general, like I said, buying a car or a two-wheeler will not be on the top of your shopping list when we come out of this situation. So there will be a demand constriction, if I may say, and the recovery will be slower. In terms of electric mobility, there are multiple factors, and all of these have been discussed in multiple forums, and I'm sure you've read about them, heard about them. You need the charging infrastructure, which Shailesh was talking about. You need the component ecosystem. You need batteries to become cheaper. You need to have longer mileage from the batteries. So all these things have to evolve, and I don't see a situation where the entire world will switch to electric cars or electric two-wheelers. Fossil fuel-based engines, IC engines, will continue to remain, and there will be a larger share than current of electric automotives in the market. That will definitely happen. The transition will happen. So for us, it's both a challenge and an opportunity. It's how we look at it. We are looking at investing in solutions for e-mobility so that we can be a part of that transition while continuing to remain in the IC engine space. In terms of automotive demand in general not picking up, I don't think in the long term auto personal transportation will die or will start degrowing. I mean, I think there is an opportunity for increased penetration here in India also as infrastructure improves. So I would remain optimistic about that.
Sure, and I think the COVID may have just increased the lifespan of IC engines than we were expecting for them to die, right? So from that perspective, they might.
Yeah,
and I have a diesel vehicle. I'm happy it may just last a little longer. Thanks a lot for answers there. There's one more question I think we may have discussed, but I'll just take it up. What are the challenges expected and way forward for importing raw materials from China? Aditi, any additional views from you? You think it's a short gap arrangement, or you think things will eventually move out of there, either locally to India or to other South Asian countries? How do you see that? Just the closing remarks and then probably end.
Yeah, so some of the shifts that are happening out of China, we might see them as permanent shifts, is my view. It might not really be a very short-term change, and that would obviously lead to shifts in sources from China to other countries, other South Asian countries, or it might lead to a development of some local sources as well, which would definitely give a economical boost to the local manufacturers as well, and they would be obviously forced to match the competitive prices that China has been offering in the past. So I see some of the shifts that are happening now to remain permanent in the future.
All right, let's hope so. That will increase more jobs in this part of the world, probably some shift. All right, then that brings us to the end of this lovely discussion. Thanks a lot, Sunil Banthia, Sunil Muralidharan, Shailesh, and Aditi. I really enjoyed the conversation and really hope to meet you in person as well sometime soon in the new normal world. And till then, take care, be safe, and thanks a lot for joining in today. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rishi. Thanks.
Yes, please.